Hello and welcome to this summer challenge tutorial. Today we are going to model one of three progressively more complicated candlesticks. This is the one we're going to start with. These are the three that we're going to do over this series. The idea is that we'll model each of these once a week. I will publish a video, and then after we've modeled all three of these, we are going to go back and UV map all three of these, but we're only really going to texture this one in Substance Painter. So hopefully this will give you a good bit of practice on some fundamentals and just be a good bit of practice. All right, so I'm going to begin by minimizing this, opening up Maya, and we're going to start brand new. I'm going to go File, New Scene, don't save. All right, so when you begin a project, you want to start by creating a project directory. You'll do that by going File, Project Window, New. You'll name the project. I called it Challenge 1. You call it Summer Challenges and save them all into one directory. It really doesn't matter. Just make sure you always have a project directory. I also like to put them somewhere that it's easy to find. I prefer my desktop so that I can grab it, stick it on my external hard drive, or put it wherever I please. If you don't set your project to the desktop or someplace that you can readily find it, know that it will go to your default project folder that you can find by going into like Maya 2024 document. It's under my documents and you just have to kind of hunt for it. Otherwise, just click on the folder and save it somewhere like your desktop. Then you'd press accept. I, on the other hand, have already created a directory, so I'm just going to go to File and go to Set Project. Remember, if you already have a project folder, you don't have to create a new project every time you start. And go to Set Project, Challenge 1, and Set. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the image that I sent you, or if you're watching this on YouTube, maybe you download it from the description. This picture here is going to be attached. And so what you want to do with that picture is you want to go into your project folder and find the source images folder. And that's where you want to stick it. That way you can call that picture into Maya and Maya will know where to find it. If you don't set your project, Maya won't know where to find the thing that the image that you've set aside for the project, and it has to be relocated. So I'm going to go ahead, open up Maya. I already set my project. I have this gradient background, by the way, because I thought that might be easier to see. But if you don't want the gradient background, or you want your screen to match mine, you can press Alt-B, and that will just go through different backgrounds. All right, so to begin, I want to pull my reference into the scene. So I'm going to press spacebar, and when I tap spacebar, that opens up my 4 orthographic views. I'm going to hover my mouse over the front camera and tap spacebar again. Now that I'm in the front view camera, just zoom in and out, and you see I can't rotate on the Z-axis anymore. I can only zoom in and out or move side to side. So in the front view, again, you can see it at the bottom, I'm going to go to View, scroll down and click Image Plane, and under Image Plane, I'm going to click Import Image, and it'll automatically go to my Source Images folder, and you can see Challenge 1, Desktop. If you open and it doesn't pull up your source images folder, chances are you're in the default directory that's associated with Maya. No big deal. Close out of it, set project, and make sure you align it with the proper directory. All right, so I'm going to click on the challenge picture, press open. And now what I want to do is I'm going to pick one of these. Let's go with the taller one. Press W for my move tool. And I'm just going to come in close and see if I can, whoops, did not mean to do that. I'm going to come in close and see if I can get this as centered on that center grid line as well as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect. There we go. And now I'm going to align the bottom of my candlestick holder rather, with the bottom grid line here. There we go. So you can see that the flat bottom of this grid is a little bit darker than the rest of the grid lines. That's the one you want to look for. It'll indicate the ground plane. So I'm just going to get it lined up as well as I can. Looks pretty good. Now I'm going to press spacebar and go to my perspective view, and I'm going to push this backward. Now what's kind of neat, I'm going to press spacebar again, you can see, Even though I move it back in the Z-axis and you can see it moving back in the top view, the perspective view, and the side view, it doesn't change scale in the front view, which is helpful. So you can move it out of the way in your other viewports and it'll stay the same dimensions in the front view. Okay, so now that I've done that, I want to make it so that I don't accidentally click on this. So if you have your channel box open, that's this to the right, you're going to see some display layers here. Now if you don't see this, it might be that you have a different workspace. So I'm in the default workspace, general workspace, in which either this is showing, or if you press Control A, you'll see your attribute editor showing. So your attribute editor, channel box, attribute editor, channel box, Control A. If you don't see either of these, you might be like in a different workspace. Just go to general and it should pop up fine. If you accidentally close out of these things, like maybe you accidentally pulled the channel box off and closed it, and same with attribute editor, and when you press Control A, they just pop up as floating windows and it's annoying, not a problem. You can always go to your workspace and reset the current workspace and bring everything back and it's just fine. Okay? Alright, so with that said, I'm going to just click on my image plane, go over to my display layer, and click this button here. This one here that says Create New Layer with Assign Selected Objects. So it's the flat piece of paper with the circle. That's kind of what the icon looks like. Click, and a layer is created. This first box with the V, that's its visibility, so you can turn it off and on. The third box, which is empty, you can click it once, and you can see just the tessellation. Click it again, and you can see the rendered view. And even though I'm selecting it, I can't, actively highlight it, because when I have this set to render view only, I can see it, but I can't interact with it. I have to turn this off again in order to it. This is really helpful when you have an image plane and you don't want to necessarily click it by accident while you're modeling. Okay? Alright, so now I want to change my viewport a little bit. I don't want to work in a 4 split view, and I don't want to work only in perspective view. So I'm going to go over here to the left, and you'll see this first box right here where my mouse is hovering. That's my perspective view. Underneath that is the 4 panel layout, and below that is the split panel layout. See here it says, it looks like there's just 2 windows. I'm going to click it, and now I've got perspective view and front view, and that's really helpful because my scene's less cluttered, and I'm also working in 3 dimensions on my right side and, well, a more flat 2-dimensional space on my left side. People who only work in a 3D space or only work in a 2D space, I should have said 2D space. When you're only working in a 2D space like this one, there's always the risk that even though it looks good from this angle, it's not looking great from every angle. That's why it's important to have at least 2 open or to just jump back and forth periodically. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to go over here to my poly modeling panel. You can also go to Create Polygon Primitives. That's another way to access these options. And I'm going to click on a cylinder because this shape, it's mostly a cylinder. Whenever you're modeling anything, you're going to want to start with a simple shape. My go-to 99% of the time is a box, but in this case, the cylinder is going to, fit the bill a little better. Now, this cylinder is obscuring my view. I could go into wireframe view if I wanted to, but that's also a little annoying. I want to be able to see more of my shape. So what's really cool is you can go over here to shading and you can go to X-ray. And that way you can kind of still see some of the shading. It's just a little bit more transparent so you can see through it and see the image through it. All right. So next thing I want to do is I want to snap my pivot point to the bottom of this cylinder. Because by default, your pivot point is in the center of your mesh. In fact, if you accidentally move this, like if I press D, D is the hotkey, D is in dog, for moving your pivot point, I can press D again, and now my pivot point is moved. If you do that by accident, there's a button up here under Poly Modeling, this one right here. If you hover over it, it'll say Center Pivot. Just click that, and it'll right itself. But in this case, I want this to be at the bottom of the cylinder. I'm going to tap D, as in dog, and then hold down V, as in violin, and I'm going to click just the Y-axis arrow, the yellow arrow pointing up and down, and I'm going to snap it down. Now what V does when you hold down V is it activates the snap to vertice. So over here you see up here where my mouse is hovering, where it's got these magnets, these are all different snap to options. And when I tap V, you can see that this most magnet is highlighted. That's the snap to vertice, and I just wanted to snap it so that it connected with the closest vertice at the bottom. Then I'm going to press D. And now, because I align this picture to be with my ground plane, instead of holding down V, I'm going to hold down X. Now notice when I hold down X, the magnet that's highlighted is the snap to grid. I'm going to go ahead and click this, and boom, see how this pivot point is snapping with the grid? And I'm just going to snap it here at the bottom so it lines up with the bottom of my candlestick holder. Candelabra? I don't know what the technical term is, but you get what I'm saying. All right, now that I've done that, I pressed spacebar so that the front view is taking up the screen. I'm going to press R for scale, and I'm going to grab the yellow square at the bottom and just kind of shrink this down until the sides of my cylinder are lining up. Now, if I had accidentally, let me just press undo. Instead of grabbing this center yellow scale, so you see when I grab the center, it grabs it on every dimension, X, Y, Z. If I had accidentally grabbed the red, for instance, and I just line this up, that still looks good. Like it looks like it's the same width, but you're going to notice in the 3D view that it looks a little off kilter. This is why jumping between 3D and 2D view is so important. We don't want to accidentally get super into our project, love the result in 2D view, only to discover in 3D view that it's all jacked up. Okay, so just a little warning there, word of caution. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and grab the center pivot of the scale and scale this down so it lines up. Again, I can double check. Look at that. Everything's staying nice and symmetric. I'm then going to tap the top of the scale tool, and I'm going to shrink this down to the top. So this reference image is kind of at an angle. It's kind of on a, it's not necessarily looking like straight on. It's on a surface that's sort of tipped. So we're going to try to do a little bit of guesswork, but also just kind of align it with the part that's like most front facing. So some of it is a little bit of an art of estimation when you've got minimal references. I mean, the solution, if you want perfect references, which isn't going to happen a lot of the time, is that you shoot your own references with your own camera settings to try and mitigate this. But 99% of the time, you're only going to get like one bit of concept art maybe, or a handful of references if you're working on a job. So you can go ahead and take some liberties and just sort of practice what would kind of look right based on, you know, your own awareness of 3D space. All right, so now that I've done this, I want to go ahead and extrude up to make the next port. So I'm going to press Q. Q is just the select tool. So Q is select, W is move, E is rotate, and R is scale. I'm going to grab Q. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go into face mode, which is one of the component modes. You can toggle between component mode and object mode by pressing F8. If you're on a laptop, you might have to press function F8 first, because, you know, our top keys often assign to other tasks on a laptop. I'm on a laptop, so I have to press function F8. But if you're on just a generic computer, or not generic computer, I should say a desktop computer, a non-laptop, then F8 by itself should be fine. You'll always know you're in object mode because it'll be green. You always know you're in component mode because it's going to be blue. Now, I'm in face mode right now, which is one of the components. The main ones are faces, vertices, and edges. And I'm going to hold down my tab key, which activates a sort of paint select. And I'm just going to select all these faces. Now, you want to double check from time to time. Press 4 for wireframe so that you can make sure you didn't accidentally select any faces behind. It doesn't typically happen with the paint select tool, but if you were doing something like this, where you're like, oh, I just want to grab these faces, maybe like this, and that looks right, but if we press 4 on wireframe, we see that we've selected faces behind it. So just got to be a little bit careful. But fortunately, when we use the paint select tool, which is just pressing tab, paint your selection, you don't usually have that problem. You can also use your object display up here. So this is my poly count, and I can see the number of faces I have selected as 20, which the default cylinder has 20 faces. So if I accidentally had another face selected, it would say like 21. Of course, you got to know the number of faces in your mesh to make that useful. But also, if you are interested in the poly count tool, To activate it, you go to Display, Heads Up Display, Poly Count. Alright, so enough of that. Let me just go ahead and select this again. 5 turns shaded view back on. I'm going to press my scale tool, which is R, hold down Shift, and you'll notice when I hold down Shift, the word extrude pops up. And I'm just going to start extruding in. Now you can let go of Shift after that, but I'm just going to kind of estimate a little roughly where I think the candlestick is going to be. I'm going to press W for my move tool, hold down Shift again, and bring this up. Okay, now I want to work in this view just a little bit. I'm going to go to Scale, grab the middle of Scale, and just kind of bring this in so it kind of matches the circumference of the top portion of this candlestick. Now, another thing, I don't particularly like working with faces. I prefer edges when I'm extruding, so I'm just going to press Delete. We can always bring those faces back. And now let's take a look and see. This is actually pretty close to the reference, but not close enough. I think this bottom part could be a little wider. So I'm going to press Edge, so right-click, Edge, and I can double-click this edge, and it automatically grabs the edges that are in that edge loop layout. When you're working with quads, which are 4-sided faces, you can often double-click an edge, and every edge that lays along that edge loop will be selected. That's why good tessellation, good topology rather. Good topology is so crucial because it allows you to select things with better ease. It also makes UV mapping easier. It makes deformations better. But enough of that. Let's go ahead and just grab the middle and scale this out. I'm just trying to kind of make it match eyeballing where the end of that candlestick is starting to taper up. Okay? So I'm going to come back to this portion. First, I'm going to just double click this edge here. Press spacebar, go back into this view. I'm going to hold down Shift with the move tool. So W, and then hold down Shift. There's extrude, and I'm just going to extrude on the Y-axis. Let's see. Oops. Again, you don't have to hold down Shift the whole time, just when you get started. All right, that looks pretty good. All right, so next, let's go ahead and grab Move tool still, hold down Shift, extrude this upward. Grab Scale, move outward. It's not perfect yet. We're going to come back and refine this, but we're just blocking out the general shape. Double check, make sure nothing's wonky. Okay, so far so good. Hold down Shift again and move this up. All right, and we'll go ahead and, we'll come back to this. Let's go ahead and double back and start refining some of these other portions and make it align a little bit better, because this isn't going to do. Before we do that, let's go ahead and save our scene. So I'm going to go File, Save Scene As. We'll just call this challenge _ 001. Sometimes, so how I like to name things in my naming conventions is I like to choose the first word being whatever it is I'm modeling. So I could have called this like candlestick. Iteration of the file 001. And then after this, I like to leave a little note as to what I did in the file. So in this case, block out. And save as. I mean, you can do other things. You can do increment and save. You can do whatever you want, but I would recommend trying to stay as organized as possible, because the more organized you are, the more organized your team is when you work in a team, and the easier it is for you to go back and access files without doing a bunch of unnecessary work. I think this needs to be a little wider, so I'm going to go double click this edge loop and scale this out. Okay, then I'm going to press Shift, right click. Now this is a little shortcut menu, and depending on what you have selected and what mode you're in, you're going to get different options. Right now I am in component mode. I don't see the option I want, so I'm going to go ahead and press Function F8. You could also right click and go to object mode if you don't want to keep pressing F8. So now that I'm in object mode, if I hold down Shift and I right click, notice that the menu pops back up, the same shortcut menu, but different options. So now Insert Edge Loop Tool is here. I'm going to double click. Now, whenever you activate an option in Maya, it populates the bottom empty space in your timeline, or not timeline, your toolbar here to the left. So what's cool about this is I can double click this tool and get into its tool settings, reset the tool, because, you know, I had it set to something else prior and I want it to be just a clean setting. Very important, especially if you're working on a school computer and you're trying to activate a modeling tool and that modeling tool is going kind of weird on you. That's something to try. Go back and see if the tools need to be reset. And you can do this with any tool. You can do it with like the move tool. You can double click the move tool and you can reset its settings. So I had it set to object, it's set to world. Kind of personally want it to be on object, but just know that you can reset it to whatever. Okay, so also when you've clicked off of a previous tool like Edge Loop, you can either go over here and click it, or you can tap the hotkey G. G is going to reactivate whatever your previous tool was. Alright, it didn't work for me that time, probably because I went into some properties. So I'm just going to click on the last used tool button here. Just know usually tapping G works. Okay, so what I'm going to do with Insert Edge Loop is I just want to get this nice taper going. So maybe just stick it somewhere like in the middle. Use my scale tool and just bring this in. Okay, it's looking a little better. Let's do that again. So maybe over here. Oh, sorry, I must have gotten out of the tool. I'm going to press G to repeat, and it's still not listening to me. So I'll just click the tool. I don't know why that hotkey isn't working for me. There we go. Bring that in. Go over here, click the tool again since our hotkey isn't behaving. Just creating a nice little taper. Cool. Alright, the other taper that I want to work on is up here at the top. So let's go over here. Because this is not like a sharp angle. It's got a little bit of roundness to it. Alright, so let's go ahead and just scale that. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. I don't think we need to add a lot of edge loops at this point. Now you notice a couple of things. One, these edges are really hard. So that has to do with your surface normals. Surface normals are these invisible lines that exist on a polygon plane. So let me go ahead and create a polygon plane for you so that this is a little bit more obvious. And by the way, sometimes it's not surface normals. In this case, it's surface normals, but sometimes you just might have a really low res mesh. But in this instance, there's enough edge loops here that it doesn't have to be this rigid. So it's definitely the surface normals. All right, so the reason I'm using a polygon plane to describe this, I just press F. That centers the camera around this object. The shaded side is the side of your mesh that has surface normals. The other side does not. That is called your back face, and the back face does have a surface normal. And what is a surface normal? On every single one of these faces, so you see this polygon plane is made up of lots of faces. Even though it's one square, it's got all these little squares inside it. Each of these little squares has a surface normal, and what a surface normal does is it tells the computer how light is going to hit a surface. If you'd like to actually see what these lines look like, you can actually go to Windows, or I'm sorry, Display, Polygons, and you can look for face normals. Boom, there they are. So these perpendicular lines basically tell Maya how light is hitting a surface. In a nutshell. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn those off because they are annoying. So face normals. The back side doesn't have those, so it doesn't really register any lighting information. So that's the first important thing to note. In fact, if you're ever modeling something and you intentionally leave the black side showing, like maybe you're creating a, I don't know, maybe you're creating a gun and the inside of the rifles, God, I'm bad at guns. What would you call it? This is embarrassing. I'm having a brain fart. What would you call it? The portion in which the bullet comes out. I'm gonna get made fun of for this. But you know, like you look, and if you were to look inside look down a gun barrel. Thank you. If you look down a gun barrel, it's gonna be dark in there, so what does it matter if you don't model the inside of the gun barrel, right? Well, Maya shows you these back faces as a courtesy, but if you were to look at this back face in a game engine like Unreal, or if you brought this into ZBrush, you would not see these black faces. Instead, you would experience something called back face culling. You can actually activate this in Maya by going to Windows, or I'm sorry, Display. I always go to Windows. Display, Polygons, Backfaced Culling. Boom. I'm sorry, I've got to select the object before I do it. Polygon, Backfaced Culling. Boom. Where'd it go? Oh, it's still there, but this is how game engines see it. It's invisible. As far as the game engine is concerned, it's not there. They just let you see this, black shaded side as a way of, not losing the object. So make sure that this isn't exposed on your model. Anyway, when you have, let's go ahead and delete the polygon plane and let's bring in a sphere this time to show this next. These surface normals can either be soft, particularly the edge normals. So edge also have normals, but we'll get to that later. Your normals are either soft or they're hard. So this one is just default normals. If I click on the ball and I press shift right click, you'll see soft harden edges. And so I'm going to say soften edge. Okay, changed. Shift right click, harden edge. Boom. See how hard that is? So that just, it's not like the mesh itself changed, but the render data on how the light hits the object changes. If it's hard, you're going to see like a lot of rigidity on the mesh. If you have it soft, then the light, it's going to treat it a little, smoother. Hard edges, you're going to want to, like with a crease, you're going to want to have maybe hard surface normals. If you're dealing with, smoother surface, you're going to want softer. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to click on the candlestick now, and I'm going to press spacebar. I'm going to shift right click, and I'm going to soften edge, or I could just do soft / harden, which is like a default degree. I think it's like 30 degrees. Yeah, so I'm going to undo that because that was a little dark. I think I wanted to go to this one first. No, didn't like that. Looks a little wonky still, but that's okay. It looks better than it did. All right, I'm going to press undo because that was a fun lesson, but really we're going to ultimately smooth this mesh, so it's not going to be as important. That's just something to consider on a low poly mesh, just FYI. All right, so let's go back to this. We're going to go ahead and press 3 for smooth, which also takes care of those hard surfaces. So even though let's go ahead and set this back to hard. Even if it's got a hard edge, if you press 3 for smooth default, the smoothing takes care of that. Kind of looks like it's made of Play-Doh. And press 1 and go back to hard surface modeling. And let's go ahead and start reinting these edges so that when we do smooth preview, it doesn't look like it's melting. So to do that, we're going to need to add some edge loops. So we already got the edge loop tool here. We don't have to refind it. One really cool technique with the insert edge loop tool, you can double click this and go into its tool settings, and there's an option called multiple edge loops too. Okay, I'm going to click on this, boom, and notice that it creates 2 edge loops that are perfectly equidistant from each other. I'm going to go ahead and click on scale, and I'm going to go ahead and scale this up, which you can do in certain instances. If this were a surface at an angle, I wouldn't recommend using this technique, but because it's either straight up and down or straight side to side, we can get away with this. And that way our edge loops are, equidistant from each other, which it's not important in this case, but it's kind of nice. I'm going to reset the tool so I don't keep doing that. All right, so let's press F8. Oh, shoot, function F8. Very important to press Q. That's the select tool. Otherwise, I would have kept adding edge loops, and press 3. Yeah, it's looking a little bit better. Let's go ahead and add some reinforcement here to the bottom. Now, one thing you're going to notice, I'm going to click the Insert Edge Loop tool, and only a dot appears. What is up with that? Well, if that happens to you, first off, let me just make sure that it didn't create a vertex. Nope, it didn't. Good. If that happens to you, it's because you're working on a triangle, or sorry, tongue twisted. You're working with triangles as opposed to quads. So the Insert Edge Loop tool goes with the flow on quad surfaces. It does not do so on triangles. So in order to get that edge reinforced, we're going to need to go to hit face mode, click tab, and select all these and delete them. At least this is the technique I'm going to use. There's other ways to do it. This is the one I'm going to use. I'm going to go to my edges, double click this. I'm going to use the scale tool, hold down shift and bring this in ever so slightly. Hold down shift again and bring it in. So you see how I extruded a little bit and now I'm extruding in a lot. Now I want to connect all these together. So I'm going to go shift right click to my shortcut menu and I'm going to merge to center. Go back to object mode, make sure I got Q selected and I'm not inside my insert edge loop tool. Press 3. Ah, there we go. We got a nice sharp edge going. All right, so looking at the reference, might want to make this one a little sharp too. I don't know, I guess it's up to you. These are quads, so I'm not necessarily worried about the edge loop tool not working this time. Double click it, reset, so I'm not creating lots of duplicates. Let's go ahead and drag this over. Boom. Press 3. Nice. Now I like the taper going up through the stem, so I'm not going to necessarily add any more edge loops to the bottom. Cool. Let's go ahead and look more toward the top of our candlestick. This looks all sorts of not quite right yet. So let's begin by adding an edge loop here, just closer. Just so you know, like if I were to put the edge loop down here and press 3, it doesn't really reinforce anything. The closer an edge is to another edge, the more it's reinforced. So if I move this edge up and I press 3, see how much sharper that is? So you can kind of see it in real time. All right, back to 1. Bring this up a little bit. 3. It feels like it's still not got quite enough shape. This taper here isn't really doing anything for me. Let's go ahead and edge loop over here. Maybe not as close because I want it smooth. If they're too close to each other, the edges, then you're going to end up with a sharp crease. That's nice. It's a nice soft crease. So just to kind of show you a demonstration, I'm going to double click these edges and move them really close. Now, when I go to smooth preview, it looks kind of pinched. So press undo. There we go. Less pinched, more smooth. It's got a little bit of angle to it, but so does the reference. So I think that's working great. All right. Now remember, smooth preview is not smoothed. So if you just press 3, you didn't actually smooth the mesh. We'll get to that later. Smoothing is always like the last step of the modeling process. All right. So next I'm going to go over here and I'm going to grab this edge and I'm going to hold down shift on the scale tool and bring this in. Oh, and smooth preview. Let me press 1 to get out of that. Hold down shift, bring this in. Now we can't see the top of the candle, so we're going to do a little bit of guesstimation. I'm going to press W for move and move this up. That way I can actually see it. And I want it to be kind of hugging this candlestick, right? So let's go get scale and just get that. Use W, hold down V for snap to vertex, and we can use the Y-axis, the yellow arrow, and snap this back. Okay, so now we can kind of figure out from looking, use deductive reasoning to figure if this candle is snugly holding if this candlestick holder is snugly holding the candle, then it stands to reason that this is about how big the hole is. All right, I'm going to hold down shift, extrude this down. Doesn't really matter because nobody's really going to see this bit, but shift to close it. Whoops. And you can shift right click, merge to center. And let's go object mode. Press Q. 3. Okay, looks very wonky up here. Let's get that fixed by reinforcing some edges. So insert edge loop tool. Let's do that again here. So I think I'm going to go back to this one and just reinforce it a little bit tighter. Okay. Okay, and I reinforced this lip here and this one here. I'm not going to worry about anything down there per se. Like maybe I'll add an edge loop here just for the sake of keeping the bottom from tapering, but nobody's really going to see it, so all right, let's take a look. Oh, let me go to Q, make sure I'm in object mode, 3, and there is our candlestick. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save my progress. Just like name it refined, like just saying what I did in this. All right, next I want to do a little bit of hygiene in my scene, meaning I want to clean up, make my scene tight, make sure everything is nice and tidy and organized and easy to navigate. Now, it's kind of a moot point when you've only got one thing in your scene, but remember, these assets could be used in scenes with hundreds of other little 3D models in it. So it's a really good idea to make sure everything's named and everything is, you know, set to a new default. So first thing you're going to note in the channel box is we've got all this garbage listed here. This is every input, everything that you did to this mesh is recorded. It's called the object's history. So what you want to do is go over here and delete history. Next, I'm going to go in the outliner. If you don't see your outliner, it's this button right here at the very bottom. And inside it's like a itinerary of everything that exists inside of your scene. There's your cylinder. It's still the cylinder. I'm going to double click it and I'm going to name it candlestick. Another thing I could do if I wanted to, if I press W, my pivot point is at the bottom. I kind of like it at the bottom, but you could center the pivot if you wanted to. The other thing is, notice inside of the channel box, if I were to create a brand new object like a cube, the defaults are 0, 0, 0, and for scale 1, 1, 1, right? So let's delete that. Click on the candlestick and you'll see X, Y, Z, they got different coordinates, and those are based on the original transformations that we made to the cylinder when we first started, before we started extruding. We don't want all that junk. We want to do something called freezing transformation. So if we go over here and click on the snowflake, boom, now it's all zeros and ones. Control S for save. Now if you want to smooth this mesh, what you're going to want to do is hold down spacebar. I mean, you can use the shortcut menu, shift right click and go to smooth. I'm in the habit of pressing spacebar. Spacebar, your hotbox. This has every possible menu in it. So notice how they're broken up: mesh, edit mesh, mesh tools. If I go over here and I click on this drop down menu and I go to modeling, look, mesh, edit mesh, mesh tools. So these are all the modeling tools. If I go to my hotbox, these are modeling, these are rigging, these are animation. So it's just instead of constantly changing this up here, you can actually access all of it from the space bar. Just a fun fact. But if you could smooth the mesh by going into the hotbox, and I think it's under edit mesh. Maybe it's under mesh. Yeah, it's under mesh smooth. Or you can shift right click and click smooth. I'm going to click the box next to it. Edit, reset settings. Let's go ahead and make this 2 divisions and smooth. Boom. So that is what a smooth mesh looks like, and if we click it, you can see there are a whole lot of polygon faces. So when you smooth, you are really upping the number of faces on your mesh. And also, check this out. If you go over here to inputs, there's your smoothed option. You can always turn it off. Go back to 0, and it's back to being a low poly mesh. Press 1, and you can just change the divisions to 1 as opposed to 2. That actually looks pretty good with 1 set of divisions as opposed to 2. Now remember, this goes away and is permanent if you delete history. You don't want to necessarily do that unless you're really fine with this never being changed ever again. That's also why we make lots of different saves. All right, so there we have it. We have this modeled. It is ready to go. We will come back and UV map this later. Oh, one more thing. Even though this is a really simple mesh and we probably didn't make any mistakes on it, I'm going to show you how to do like a really quick spell check, for lack of a better word. This option doesn't catch everything, but it can catch a lot of mistakes that you make in your mesh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the mesh. I'm going to hold down spacebar. Also, this menu, if you want to go away, you can press Q. The last input you can usually access by pressing T, and it's just like the little window that pops up, but I'm just turn it off Q. All right, so I've selected my mesh. I'm going to press spacebar. I'm going to go to mesh, and I'm going to go to optimize, cleanup, and I'm going to click the box next to it. Let me reset the settings. All right, so what the cleanup tool does is it kind of susses out and fixes errors in your mesh. Let me rephrase that. It can fix errors in your mesh. I prefer to use it to highlight errors in my mesh, and then I fix it. Because Maya's idea of fixing things isn't always the most... It's not usually the best choice. Like sometimes if you have like an Ngon in meaning, standing in the way of any number. Like it could be a 6-sided, 7-sided. N represents any number that's above 4. So if you have a 5, 6, 7-sided on here, instead of just going in, maybe merging some vertices and fixing it, the cleanup tool likes to add a million edge loops or connecting edges to different vertices to fix it. So long story short, I don't ask the cleanup tool to clean up my mesh. I just use it to find things. So let's get that done. Operation, I want it to select. So not clean up the mesh, select the mesh. I want it to apply to all polygons in my scene, which is just this polygon, so that works. First thing I'm going to ask it to do is find faces with more than 4 sides, i.e. an n-gon. Apply. Nothing is highlighted. That means there are no n-gons. Just to show you what would happen if I click off of this and I go 4-sided faces, apply, everything is highlighted because almost everything on here is a quad. So let's click off of that. Faces with more than 4 sides, apply, and nothing is highlighted. So next thing I'm going to look for is remove geometry options. So these are things that you would fix through the tessellation. This is stuff that you would actually remove from the mesh. So lamina faces are faces that are sharing all edges, meaning like perhaps you created, you clicked on a face, extruded it, but you didn't move it. So it's just 2 faces on top of each other. This tool isn't bulletproof, but it does do a good job of catching some of them. So let's press apply. No lamina faces. Cool. Non-manifold geometry. So an example of non-manifold geometry, just to show, would be if I extruded an edge like this. See, this is problematic. You've got a side that's got no surface normal information and it's exposed. So if I click on this, I go to function F8, and I press look for non-manifold geometry, which is all I'm looking for, apply, and it's going to grab a hold of these vertices here and be like, hey, there's something up. So if I go over here and I delete this face, and then I go and I select and I say, hey, is there a problem? No, there is not. So it hunts out non-manifold geometry. Edges and faces with 0 geometry. This is something that happens when you maybe extrude an edge loop or extrude a face and again don't move it. So you've got 2 edges or 2 faces laying on top of each other. So it's kind of like a lamina face, except they might not all be sharing an edge. They're just overlapping. So I'm going to press apply, and there's none of those. All right, so essentially this tool says that my stuff's cleaned up as far as it can tell. I don't see anything like standing out to me as wrong with the mesh. Those are the things that you look for the most. So I think this mesh is ready to go. All right, so my challenge for you, if you're watching this video, is if you don't like how your candlestick came out when you were following along with me, remodel that candlestick until it looks like your reference, until you're satisfied with it. Don't try to get close to the reference. Try to be as accurate to the reference as possible. What I mean by that is, don't just be like in the ballpark. Try to get it to match the reference as best as you possibly can. Like if I were to go back in, I would probably soften some of these edges because I think they're a little softer here. But generally speaking, this matches the reference. Also, once you've practiced that and you're happy with it, go find an object that maybe is similar, like maybe a shampoo bottle, or maybe, oh gosh, I don't know, a flashlight. And another little tip, if I were going to model the candlestick, which I'm not going to until we get to the 3rd object, the 3rd candlestick challenge, if I were going to actually model the candlestick that goes into the candle holder, I would make a separate mesh. I wouldn't extrude the candlestick out of the candlestick holder. So if you decide to create something like a shampoo bottle, or if you decide to create a flashlight, if your actual object is multiple pieces, you can make multiple pieces. That makes keeping your edge loops a lot easier to manage, and keeps you from necessarily having to apply a whole lot of edge loops to make it look like separate objects when it's not. So just a tip, if it's separate objects in real life, go ahead and model them as separate objects here in Maya. At least that's my tip. You can do what you want. If you want me to look over your mesh, if you are one of my students and want me to look over your mesh as a challenge, go ahead and send me an email. Otherwise, hope this works out for you, and I will be uploading the next challenge in due time.